Don't buy a house just because the world told you it proves you have won. I know that sentence sounds wrong, almost offensive, especially to those who spent their lives hearing that a real man needs to have a roof in his own name, a deed in the drawer, and a trimmed lawn in front of the window. They will say that thinking this way is fear, weakness, a lack of ambition. But at 84 years old, I learned that some keys do not open freedom. They open a beautiful prison. My name is Albert Clifford, and I am not saying that a house is a bad thing. A house can protect a family, hold photographs, welcome grandchildren on a Sunday, and keep the smell of coffee on a cold morning. The problem begins when you buy walls to silence shame, when you sign papers to prove your worth, when you confuse an address with dignity, because there is an obscure truth that no one puts in the contract. Sometimes the house you buy to live better slowly begins to buy your life back. Maybe you are listening to this now with a part of you resisting, because you were taught to believe that owning a home is the final proof that life has gotten on track. Maybe you have already looked at listings late at night with the blue light of your phone on your face, comparing prices, neighborhoods, beautiful kitchens, and Porsches that seem to promise a peace you did not have yet. And, as you swiped across the screen, some voice inside you said, "I should have achieved this by now." I know that voice. It does not speak loudly, but it knows how to hurt. It appears when a friend shows photos of their new house, when a relative asks if you still pay rent, when someone says, with that polite smile, that rent money is money thrown away. No one realizes that sometimes a person is not postponing an achievement. They are trying not to enter an obligation bigger than their own breathing. The problem is that society does not sell a house as walls, a roof, taxes, and maintenance. It sells it as respect. It sells it as maturity. It sells it as proof that you did not fail. And then many people begin to desire not exactly a house, but the relief of no longer having to explain themselves. They want a key in their hand to silence looks, questions, comparisons, and that old fear of seeming less adult than everyone else. But listen calmly. Before buying anything that will bind your name for years, ask where that desire was born. Was it born from your peace or from your shame? Was it born from a mature choice or from a race to catch up with people who are not even truly looking at you? Because that is exactly where my story began. Not with a house, but with a desperate need to prove that I was somebody. I was 84 years old when I finally managed to say this without feeling ashamed. For much of my life, I did not just want a home. I wanted proof. My name is Albert Clifford. Today I live alone in an old house on the outskirts of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And if you looked at the front of it, you might think I had been a prudent man. Clean windows, a narrow porch, a wooden chair near the door, everything in its place. But houses know how to lie too. They show the world an orderly image while hiding inside them the silence of postponed conversations, shelved dreams, and nights when you lie down too tired to remember why you started. For many years, people called me responsible, hard-working, a family man. I smiled, accepted the compliment, and went back inside carrying a debt that did not show on anyone's face. My wife, Margaret, used to say I was always home but rarely present. At the time, I thought that was unfair. I said I was working for us, that every extra hour was to protect our future, that someday it would all make sense. But the future has a cruel way of arriving without giving back what you handed over along the way. By the time I realized it, Daniel no longer called me to talk like he used to, and Emily had already learned to handle her own pain without knocking on my door. So when I tell you not to buy a house before understanding this dark truth, I am not speaking as a man against the American dream. I am speaking as someone who has lived long enough to discover that some accomplishments applauded on the outside can cost dearly on the inside. The question that followed me for decades was simple. What exactly did I buy that afternoon when I signed my name for the first time? I still remember the afternoon Margaret and I visited that house for the first time. It was 1971. The sky was gray, and the real estate agent, Charles Bennett, spoke as if he were handing us not a property, but a respectable identity. He opened the front door and said that this was the kind of place where a man built his name. Margaret looked at the kitchen with calm eyes, trying to imagine curtains, simple dinners, and our children running down the hallway. I, however, was not seeing the house. I was seeing the faces of everyone who would finally stop treating me like someone incomplete. My father, Walter Clifford, always used to say that a man who pays rent lives with his suitcase half packed. That sentence went into me like an old nail into wood. So when Charles spoke about the future, security, and pride, I did not hear numbers. I heard the chance to prove my father wrong about me. That night, Margaret asked if that payment would fit without crushing us. I answered yes, far too quickly. Today I understand. When a man answers before he breathes, maybe he is not choosing. Maybe he is obeying the fear of looking small. In the early years, I called it a necessary sacrifice. I worked overtime at Harold Jenkins' shop, came home with my hands smelling of oil, and still climbed onto the roof to fix a leak. Margaret would call my name from the kitchen, but I always answered, just one more minute. And that minute turned into a decade. The house began asking for things no one had mentioned during that visit. Insurance, taxes, paint, plumbing, interest, repairs, new furniture so it wouldn't look like we were living halfway. Every bill arrived politely, folded inside a white envelope. But inside it, a piece of my peace was being charged. When Daniel wanted to play ball in the backyard, I was too tired. When Emily wanted to show me a drawing, I told her to leave it on the table because I needed to review the bills. I thought I was being a father by keeping that roof standing, without realizing that my children didn't just need a roof, they needed me breathing near them. That was how the house became a silent boss. It didn't shout, didn't pound the table, didn't call me by name, but it decided my vacations, my mood, my nights, and even the size of my dreams. And the question I didn't have the courage to ask was this: when does a house stop protecting a family and start swallowing that family? Across the street lived Frank Miller, a man everyone pointed to as an example. His house was bigger than mine. The lawn looked as if it had been cut with a ruler, and at Christmas his lights shone so brightly they seemed to tell the whole neighborhood, "A winner lives here." Frank was polite, always wearing a neatly pressed shirt, always talking about renovations, investments, and property values in the neighborhood. But when I saw him sitting alone in the garage, staring at nothing with a can of beer in his hand, there was something in him that no fresh coat of paint could hide. His children, Robert and Linda, almost never came around. His wife, Carol, rarely smiled, and when she did, it looked as if she were apologizing to her own face. One day, Frank said to me quietly, while we pretended to talk about tools, "Albert, I spent my entire life paying for a house where almost no one wants to stay." That went into me like a crack in the wall, because Frank had done everything right in the eyes of the world, and still, he seemed like a man evicted from inside his own life. That was when I began to suspect that maybe the game had been rigged from the very beginning. Over time, I began to see the house as an anchor, not because every anchor is bad. A boat needs one when the water is calm and the harbor is safe. The problem begins when you drop the anchor to the bottom just to convince others that you have found stability, even when the storm has already changed direction. A house bought with freedom can be shelter, but a house bought out of fear becomes weight. It pins your feet to a town you may no longer love, to a job that is stealing your health, to a life that looks respectable on the outside, but inside is crying for help. It took me years to admit that I was not just paying for the house. I was paying to maintain an image of Albert Clifford that others admired, the responsible man, the providing husband, the firm father, the decent neighbor. And every time that image smiled in the street, some true part of me grew quieter inside the house. So understand this clearly. Security is not staying still just because everyone applauds your prison. Security is being able to breathe where you are. It is being able to change when life demands it. It is having a home that holds your body without sinking your soul. An anchor only protects you when you still have the strength to lift it. The enemy was never the house. The enemy was the lie they wrapped around it. The idea that you are only an adult when you have a deed, only wise when you tie yourself down for decades, only worthy when you can point to walls and say, "This is mine." That lie shows up dressed as advice. A brother says renting is a waste. A coworker says property ownership is the only path. A relative asks when you are finally going to grow up. And little by little you start confusing pressure with wisdom, comparison with planning. But no one asks whether that mortgage payment will steal your Sundays, whether that purchase will force you to accept a job you hate, whether that address will trap your marriage in a routine with no air. They only look at the facade. No one walks into the kitchen with you at 11 at night when the bills are open and peace is closed. That is why I say this, with the bitter calm of someone who took too long to understand. Do not buy a prison just to look free. Do not sign away an entire life just to silence mouths that tomorrow will be judging something else. The guilt you feel for questioning that dream was not born in you, it was planted. Today I understand that a house should not be a trophy to show the world. It should be a place where your life can fit without apologizing. If it requires you to abandon your health, your presence, your joy, and your freedom just to maintain an appearance, then maybe it is not a home. Maybe it is just pride with a fixed address. Before buying, ask yourself honestly, am I looking for shelter or approval? Am I choosing a place to live or proof to present to others? Because there is a huge difference between building security and buying a cell with beautiful windows. A good house is not the most admired one on the street, nor the one that finally makes your relatives go silent. A good house is the one that does not turn every morning into a bill. It is the one where you can sit at the table, take a deep breath, and still recognize your own life inside it. So, if you have not bought one yet, do not hate yourself for waiting. If you already bought one and it feels heavy, do not call yourself a failure for reconsidering. The truth is simple, but few have the courage to say it. Home is not where your name is registered. Home is where your soul does not have to pay rent to exist. Today, at 84 years old, I am not telling you to never buy a house. I am telling you not to hand your entire life over to an idea that may not have even been born inside you. A house should protect your peace, not demand that you sell your health, your presence, and your most alive years just to maintain a beautiful facade. If one day you buy awake. Buy because that place fits your life, not because you need to prove something to relatives, neighbors, or to some old voice inside your head. And if you still have not bought one, maybe that is not delay. Maybe it is prudence. Maybe it is God, life, or your own soul saying, breathe before you sign. So answer me honestly. Do you want a home or just proof of your worth? If this message touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear this before making a mistake far too expensive. Comment below which truth you are ready to face and subscribe to the channel because a house should protect your life, not take its place.